Hour today, the most complex structure in the universe. What's that? That's the human brain. 86 billion neurons, and we're going to be focusing on the brain, the mind, and the person within, which is the title of a new book written by Dr. Mark Cosgrove. We're going to do this for a couple of reasons. We've done some of these conversations in the past about mind and brain and about body and soul, but also we recognize if you go to any bookstore, as I tend to on a regular basis, go in the psychology section, you'll have all sorts of people suggesting that now our brain research shows that all we are as biological computers. We have no free will. We're just machines. And that this idea of there being a mind, the idea of there being a soul is outdated because science has proven all of those ideas to be wrong. Well, we're going to maybe give you a perspective that desperately needs to be heard, and we're going to be spending our time in this first hour today talking with Dr. Mark Cosgrove. He is professor and chairman of the psychology department at Taylor University. He is the author of a number of books, some of the previous ones, things like Counseling for Anger, The Essence of Human Nature, which was something that was published by Probe Ministries in the Christian Free University curriculum. This new book, The Brain, the Mind, and the Person Within, published by Kriegel. And he is, of course, also an individual that has been teaching not only just psychology, but also teaches a subject of foundations of Christian thought. He's been teaching that for more than 30 years. Mark Cosgrove, welcome back to Point of View.
Well, thank you for the welcome.
It is always great to talk with you. And as I mentioned, we used to be on the same staff. You left about the time I came, but we've always kept in touch. And talk about this significance, because right now we've got a number of people that are writing saying that there is no mind, there is no soul. Basically, we're just predetermined biological computers. I think you dissent from that view, don't you?
I do, and I think for a lot of reasons. One is a lot of those books that you mentioned on the bookshelves, or some of the serious thinkers in the field, are really arguing more from assumptions that the universe is just material and you're part of the universe, therefore that's what you must be, arguing more from that point of view than from evidence that is coming out of the science laboratories.
Well, we're going to talk about some of that evidence, but I love how you start one of your chapters. This is a quote from another individual. If the human brain were so simple that we could understand it, then we would be so simple we couldn't understand it. And early on, you talk about that's kind of the Pooh Bear problem, because Winnie the Pooh is scratching his head trying to figure out, will Pooh Bear ever be able to understand Pooh Bear? That's kind of our difficulty, because if nothing else, the human brain is a lot more complex than I think even scientists a few decades ago might have anticipated.
That's right. It's like wading into the ocean. You're just on the shore and you're wiggling your toes in the water and you think you've understood it all when there's a huge amount of depth of water. And if the brain is the most complicated physical structure in the universe, and almost everyone admits that, atheist, agnostic, then when you start thinking of spirit or our subjective feelings, it becomes even more profound, as well as we look at the God who made it and feel that it's wonderful.
Well, again, that's kind of a focus of your attention, because you've looked at some of these areas of experimental psychology. And so there is a tendency for, can I use a big word, reductionism, to assume that everything can be reduced down to physics. But there seems to be a lot more to the human brain than just a lot of electrical signals going past neurons, isn't there?
That's right. And if you want to reduce reductionism, human beings, to just matter, one reason I bring up the subject of personhood in every chapter is that it's amazing that what human beings do with their little poo-like brains.
I guess we've got lost him. Did we lose him? Okay, we lost Mark Cosgrove. Then we will do our best to try to get him back. But again, we're talking about this book, which is entitled The Brain, the Mind, and the Person Within. And so we'll do our best to get him up in just a minute. And if you're watching this online or listening to it, let me encourage you to get a couple more pieces of information that we have available to you today. And those are various articles about this. And there he is. Now we got him again. Mark, I had lost you for just a second, but you were talking about this idea that all through your book, you talk about this idea of human personhood. And that's something that has been, again, reduced down to nothing. But if we really take people at their face value, we recognize that people are more than just the collection of their neurons, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And we have a lot of disciplines that spend time on that. So in literature, art, history, the applications we make of business, and we do search for ethics and ethical guidelines because we're more. And for neuroscience to just dismiss all that and act like the sciences are the premier kings and queens of the universe of knowledge is just not true. We learn in so many ways, and to look at neuroscience itself, there are other interpretations of the data that are being popularly put forth. Good interpretations from good scientists, people who understand the nature of the brain.
I might just mention we already have calls coming in, so if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212 as we talk about mind and brain and body and soul. This is all part of a book. It's about 180 pages published by Kriegel called The Brain, the Mind, and the Person Within. We have information about that on the website. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, since some people might think of it as a little more technical book. It may not be in all bookstores, so that's why we've made it very easy for you to order it online if you would like to do so. And again, all of that information is on the website, pointofview.net. You can get it in paperback, and I suspect it'll probably be coming out in Kindle and a number of other formats in the future. Let's also talk about, maybe we'll take a break, but when we come back from the break, let's talk about the different parts of the brain, because they're the various lobes of the brain, and it might be good for somebody that's worked in the area of experimental psychology to kind of give us a little bit of a roadmap. But also, one of the things, Mark, that you do is you give us a person of interest. And so whether it's Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, or a variety of other individuals, we learn quite a bit about these individuals. But I was struck by the fact that even though after Albert Einstein died and they saved his brain, eventually they got permission to look at his brain and concluded it really isn't that different than anyone else's. True?
No, it's even a little bit smaller than ours. What it has is a lot more interconnections, things connecting together, which is not the push-button model of the brain, which has become popular over the last 100 years. It is a brain similar to ours, but there's something more going on.
And again, that is something to think about as well. But one of the reasons I encourage all of you to make sure that you wear bike helmets and you make sure you don't do anything dangerous is because this is the most complex structure in the universe. Take care of it. We're going to take a break, and we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Mark Cosgrove, and we'll get into maybe just a little bit of a map on the brain, and then we're going to talk about some of these other related issues in terms of how this plays itself out, whether or not we have free will, and what about the issues of personality? There's a lot more to cover. Just a fascinating book, which I think is a very good antidote and maybe a pushback to some of the books that are showing up in our bookstores right now that are saying, there's no mind, there's no soul, we're just biology. Nope, the Bible's right. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Will divisive debates about public policy break America apart? David French fears that could happen with the current debate and dissension over gun control. He wrote about it after the CNN town hall on gun control, but it could just as easily be written about the controversy and conflict that has surfaced this last week. It might be easy to write off some of the hysterics and hyperbole as an outlier. Surely the American people will regain their senses and realize that even if we have fundamental disagreements about guns and gun legislation, that should never be allowed to pull us apart. That may not be the case. David French says that millions of Americans who watched all or part of the town hall came away with a clear message. These people aren't just angry at what happened in their town to their friends and family members. They hate me. These emotions aren't fake or manufactured. They come from fierce convictions and sincere belief. We have seen similar hysterics over such policy issues as regulatory reform and net neutrality. One of the guests on my radio program explained the progression from conflict over net neutrality to the anger over the gun debate. He reminded us that those who supported the FCC decision about net neutrality were called Hitler. Once you label your opposition as Hitler merely because they want to remove some regulations added 2 years ago, there is nowhere to go but down. Nobody's life is at stake by changing some rules affecting the internet. However, the gun debate does affect lives, so anyone who opposes you is worse than Hitler. You are evil and support a gun organization that is a terrorist organization. Meanwhile, compromise. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment, I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG in theaters March 16th. More information at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Working our way through this book called The Brain, the Mind, and the Person Within for a couple of reasons. First of all, for you to have a fresh appreciation for the fact that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, as it says in Psalm 139. But also, just from an apologetic point of view, we talk about how so often here on Point of View, we want you to know how to articulate a biblical worldview, but also to defend a biblical worldview. And I think one of the areas where there is sort of an attack on Christianity right now are coming from those individuals that are saying there's no free will, there's no soul, there's no mind, we're just meat computers, biological computers, and that's all. And so if nothing else, we think that this would be a very helpful book for you to know about, who comes again from Dr. Mark Cosgrove, who's professor and chairman of the psychology department at Taylor University. He's been on the program with us before, author of a number of books. But if we can, Mark, let's turn this into maybe Brain Science 101. How does our brain work? We have about 86 billion neurons. This is just amazing to think about. And then we have all these different lobes, a parietal lobe, a frontal lobe, and then these are all connected together with neurotransmitters. Can you kind of give us just a little bit of an overview of how our brains work?
Well, you can start from the smallest, glial cells, neurons, all the patchwork by the billions and by the trillions when we talk about glial cells, making that thoroughly complicated matrix into larger centers. So we have a speech center. There are areas more involved with emotion, motivation, or vision, or hearing, or speech. The larger lobes, when you're looking at the outside of your brain, it's gray. It's made up of those billions of neurons. We, instead of asking the tiny question, what does this part do or that part do, there's a lot of evidence that if you ask the larger question, what does the frontal lobe do, what does the parietal lobe do, what does the temporal lobe do, you start getting answers that are suggesting that we're being lifted away from material reality. So, for example, the frontal lobes, and we learned this from anesthetics, general anesthetics. If you separate brain lobes, and that's what general anesthetics do, they have different operations to pull different parts apart or stop the communication. Frontal lobes, when they're disconnected from communication with the central part of the brain, the limbic system, the emotional, motivational part, you start producing a person who we'd call a one-minute man. That is, they're no longer able to form and store long-term memories longer than a few minutes. That can happen by accident. That can happen through surgery. In which case, if you can't maintain a sense of the past, the present, and the future anticipations all together, you're gone. You are just a one-minute person. The parietal lobe seems to be involved. If you separate it from its connections with the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe, you start lacking meaning in your sensations. So you can see, I mentioned the book, you can see, I can give you a P for a pass grade. You've got to connect it to pass. If I give you a Q, you don't know what to connect it to. There's no meaning. The person who is normal has the parietal lobe separated from working with the important temporal lobe and speech center and the frontal lobe. They can see a set of keys. They can see a book, and all they can do is see the form of it. The keys, they say, are long and silvery and black, but they no longer see keys, which are meaningful to us. At times, your brain seems more designed to help us read Shakespeare than to find food to eat. The temporal lobe has the speech center, and that seems to allow us to exist in symbols.
Mm-hmm.
When that is destroyed globally, particularly in males, no thoughts exist except maybe artistic thoughts. The person is gone. You exist out of time in past, present, and future. You're existing away from the material world. With the parietal lobe, you're existing in meaning, the meaning of things, not just in the things themselves. And with the temporal lobe and the speech center, you're existing in symbols. Right now, our minds are filled with symbol things. Unless we suddenly hit our thumb with a hammer or get chased by a bee, then we become those material things. So human beings with that complicated brain are lifted away from the material world, and that's strange for a material brain to be able to do that.
Yes.
Its interaction with something more than matter is what I would begin to suspect, as opposed to neuroscience continually looking at what we do as animals, what's an advantage for us as an animal, as opposed to what's an advantage to us in a larger world of spirit and meaning and purpose and significance, which is what we want for human beings.
Well, again, for our listeners, I don't know if you're a cat person or a dog person, whoever you are as a listener, but you have noticed the difference between your pet, whether it's a dog or a cat or whatever it is, and you in terms of, yes, they might see a key, but they don't understand the significance of using a key to open a door or a key to start a car. You have certain symbols. And some dogs know a couple of words, especially words like treat or outside or something like that. But almost instantaneously, Mark, we have this sense, even before we go into brain science, that there is something uniquely different about our brains compared to our pets, or even about our brains compared to other primates. And if you assume that we are just a product of mass, energy, chance, and time, product of evolution, why is it that our brains are able to think such lofty thoughts, write music, explore the universe, if there's really no evolutionary advantage to any of that?
That's right, and we don't find gradual approximations of our brain either. So, and I'm nothing against the intelligence of dogs or chimpanzees, but the brain of a chimpanzee, a third the size of ours, doesn't have that architecture of the large frontal lobe, the speech center. There's a limit to what it can do, even though it can do more than a worm. We are light years ahead in terms of, and you can see it. And we want to say, not only am I smarter or doing more, but I have value and purpose and meaning and significance that's behind all this.
Let's, if we can, also talk about the fact that these neurons don't touch each other. There are chemicals between them. That's what's called a synapse. And that's important because if some individuals get certain brain hormones that are drained away, they become depressed. Or if they go out and they exercise and eat right and maybe are involved, they actually get more endorphins. So those chemicals are very important. And when a person has certain chemical imbalances, that creates some of the other brain problems or mental problems. True?
True. And the Connectome Project, which is important, was meant to map the neural highways, the neurons and groups of neurons. And in a sense, we're ignoring the chemical highways, which would be harder to map. And those chemical highways are the ones that produce modulations or rhythms in the brain. And some neuroscientists have said at times we look more like a song or more like a poem than we do a computer. And that's that chemistry. You look more like a message than you do some objective animal seeking objective meals.
So again, we will come back and get into a little bit more of that, but let me just at least start the conversation, because the other question you ask, and this is really back to some of these issues, do we see just neural pixie dust, or do we see God's Spirit? Because it does seem to me that already, just even before we get into some of the kind of the bigger metaphysical questions, we're dealing with an issue that suggests that those that want to reduce us down to just chemicals and neurons are missing the fact that there is this sense that human beings just travel this planet looking for more. I mean, I can meet the physical needs of our dogs and our cats, and they look pretty contented. I don't know what cat contentment or dog contentment looks like, but it looks pretty much like that. But I can meet the physical needs, Mark, of human beings, and they travel the world looking for more meaning. What about that?
That's correct, and that's why I bring up persons in the book continually, because we do so much more when our basic physical needs are satisfied. We are all over the place. We are writing diaries about love. We're not just sexual beings, but we write the novels, produce the movies, explore the art and the poetry of all those inner thoughts. And we have to be willing to examine that. But if you're a neuroscientist and say, all there is matter, therefore I'm going to use the tools to examine matter. I'm going to look at neurons, and then I may look at connections between neurons. You're missing the whole point. You're missing the bigger picture of human beings and what they can do, and that might give guidance and interpretations to your findings in neuroscience, your findings about the small things, about the connectome highway, about persons and their needs in the non-physical world, in terms of that's what counseling always been, to look for self-worth and value. None of that is visible in the neurons, and yet it's so visible in human beings.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we will continue our conversation with Mark Cosgrove. We're going to talk also about habits, and a while back I heard some people talking about the backwards bicycle. He's got that in here as well. It shows, again, habits and all sorts of things we can learn about today. Fascinating book called The Brain, the Mind, and the Person Within. Dr. Mark Cosgrove with us a little bit longer. The Enduring Mystery of the Soul. It is published by Kriegel. We'll be right back.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment comes I Can Only Imagine. The untold true story of Mercy Me's Bart Millard and the power of redemption and forgiveness.
My dad was a monster, and I saw God transform him. I didn't think that God could do that.
I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters March 16th. More information is available at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
When you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living on a different planet from those presenting the headlines? We've always known there was a subtle bias, but today, it's about as subtle as stepping off a 1,000-foot cliff. The only way to counteract that bias is with the truth. To join the Truth Team at Point of View, your support will educate and encourage potentially millions every day. Don't let lies win. Step up so that lives and our nation can be changed. Join the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Mark Cosgrove. This is probably a program where you kind of want to sit back and just listen, maybe take some notes, of course, get a copy of the book. But let me just mention that if you do have a question, you are free to give us a call. That number is 1-800-351-1212. And, of course, as we're talking about this in terms of how you can really kind of defend, if you will, a biblical perspective on human personhood and the idea of a mind and a soul, certainly that is applicable, but of course we've also talked about what happens when we don't have some of those neurotransmitters, what happens if we have a concussion, what happens if one part of the brain doesn't function. Certainly if you have some comments or questions about brain diseases or other mental disorders that might have developed because of something physiological, that's certainly fair game as well. Dr. Mark Cosgrove with us. He is the author of the book, The Brain, the Mind, and the Person Within, The Enduring Mystery of the Soul. Let me come back to this for just a moment, because in one of the sections you talk about the fact that even C.S. Lewis wrote about the hideous strength, talks about science that's gone awry, researching how to keep a human head alive. I mean, there are all sorts of people today that are believing that if we're just biology, that if I freeze the body, if I freeze the head, someday we might be able to connect you up to another body or connect you up to a robot, you become a cyborg. If we understand some things from a biblical point of view, Mark, that pretty much is science fiction. It certainly isn't science fact, is it?
That's changing, and you have to understand how rapidly the technology, neurotechnology, is changing. We want to come up with ethics to guide us, but the problem is the changes are coming faster than our ethical discussions, and the ethics will come from a more naturalistic point of view. Just a little over a month ago, the first head transplant was done on a corpse and successful, and in the next few months, 6 months, the doctor involved wants to do a head transplant. We've done heart transplants and so on, but a head transplant to a human body, someone whose body is deteriorating away with ALS, volunteers to have the surgery. Then you find a patient whose brain, through a gunshot or whatever, has been destroyed, and then you sever the bodies at the neck, and then a 2-day operation to join them together, and maybe then walking in a year. Who knows whether that'll be successful or not, but the idea is, and you're bringing it up, there's a lot more to our brain than just what's up there. Our bodies contribute some, the hormones of the body that help shape the habits of the brain and so on. No, that is coming, and even more things with brain chips that are working to put minds together, to communicate together. And I don't know that science is bad. I hope Christians get into the sciences so that you can be some of those who guide science, who develop the ethical discussions, who want to spend more money on the other end of life with infants than to spend money on prolonging life past 120. We need good decision-making to use all these tools that are coming online.
You know, a number of years ago, as we have talked about before, Pro Ministries has a 3-minute program that's on about 600 stations, and I did a whole week of programs on neuroethics. And the reason I did that is because it is becoming, this is one of the things you talk about in the book, the ability now that we might have to erase certain memories. And if somebody has PTSD, or if you think about the movie, which again was science fiction, but it's getting a little more reality-based, The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. You know, you had Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet on that, where they were trying to erase certain kinds of memories. Well, we're getting there. And when you go back to the head transplant, I remember one time I was speaking at Dallas Theological Seminary in Howard Hendricks' class, and I said, just think about this for a moment. Let's imagine that as Howard Hendricks was getting older, we still wanted to maintain his brain, and maybe I became brain dead. Of course, some of my critics think I'm already brain dead. And so let's say they could take Howard Hendricks' brain and put it in my body. Then I asked the seminary students, would Howard Hendricks wake up in my body, or would I wake up with Howard Hendricks' brain? And it just got everybody thinking for the first time how we are heading into 21st century kinds of ethics that are going to require Christians to go into fields like neurophysiology and psychology and other places, because those decisions are going to be made, and sadly, they're going to be made by a lot of people that don't have a Christian conviction.
That's right. And if you think of where the money comes from, a lot of decisions will be made because they pay, because of profit. And again, I'm not saying anything about your iPhone or others, but the profit motive does propel a lot of the new technologies, as well as things that could be going on in military research that we don't even know about. And I'm not for not seeing that research, but guidance, careful guidance, because we're dealing with the human person, and trying to find purpose, meaning, and significance is not going to come from technology. We're going to have other ways of working with people and other ways of lengthening life or helping someone live or live well other than a head transplant. And you get the idea sometimes that it's an old man's head on a young man's body, and it's just funded by the mafia, because there's no good reason to be moving into it, as opposed to spend the money on hospitals for children or for discovery of solutions to AIDS or others. It takes ethics to decide where to spend your money as well.
Fascinating. I did mention something about habits, and we'll move on to this idea of God and the brains. But there was I heard this story the other day, and then I read it about in your book, and that is an individual wanted to see the importance of habits, and so he figured out a way to switch a bicycle handlebar so that when you turn left, it goes right, and when you turn it right, it goes left. Well, the bottom line is that his 6-year-old son learned to ride a normal bike and only took 2 weeks to learn how to ride a backwards bike. But the father, it took months for him, a full 8 months to do that. And I think it illustrates a couple of things. First of all, the importance of habits, but also what we talk about, a word we use sometimes on this program, neuroplasticity. The brain is more plastic than we thought, but it's a lot more plastic for the kids than it is for us old guys, right?
That's right. That's right. But it is even plastic and changeable, even to old age. One thing about that experiment, it does tell us that we are, if you ask the free will question, are we free or are we not, there is a lot of our behavior that's not free, and you might even put a high percentage on it. I have learned, and through habit, I know how to button my shirt, tie my shoes, play the C chord on the guitar. People can play whole songs without thinking of them. And in fact, if you thought about the music you're playing on the piano, you'd mess it up. Your body runs through a lot of activities on its own. Driving a car, the first time you learned to drive the car that was a stick shift, you had to think about it. After a while, you didn't. That frees up the other 10%, where your mind, free of the body details, can actually think, to elevate itself, to look at life, to look at physics formulas, to be free of having to sit and think every time I made the bed or got my shirt buttoned up or my shoestrings tied or my watch looked at. It's just, there's a lot of mechanical activity in us. Okay, but don't use that as evidence that I'm not free. I am not free much of the time, but that doesn't matter. My freedom is in my mind, and that's where we have to gain control with education, with discipline, things that the Christian worldview would certainly agree with.
Let's talk about that idea of free will, because we have a number of people writing about this that are arguing that we are basically biologically and biochemically predetermined. And I'm not talking about a spiritual or theological discipline like predestination, but they're saying we're predetermined or predestined. We are really nothing more than these brains that are just meat computers. Do we have any evidence to suggest? Obviously, you said that there are many times when we do run on autopilot, but do we have evidence from experimental psychology that shows any kind of evidence for free will?
Okay, let me say it with two answers. One is, again, the other side is arguing from assumptions. No one has assumptions that we're determined except finding things that show habits, and we all agree that, yes, we have habits. The opposite would be when experiments are being done, and I mentioned the Benjamin LeVay experiment of a time clock, and you have to decide when to push a button, we do notice, as has been pointed out, that there'll be a spike of electrical activity that occurs in your brain before the conscious decision that you're going to move your wrist or your finger. And that's been pointed out as, that's determinism in action. The truth is, the same research types have found that free won't exist, that you can stop activities that your brain is in the process of putting forth. You seem to have the ability to stop activity, and that's often used as a discussion of you may not be free, but you have free won't. You can stop that swear word from coming forth. You can stop hitting someone, and when you have the feeling to hit someone, a child or whatever, that the human behavior illustrates itself. If you don't accept that type of evidence, then no, by assumption alone, you say you're determined because every molecule and matter in the universe is determined.
We'll take a break right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Pastor John Leland, a Baptist minister in Massachusetts, celebrated Thomas Jefferson's election from his pulpit by announcing that the congregation would make a giant wheel of cheese to honor the incoming president. So, on the morning of July 21, 1801, the congregation hauled pails and pails of curds drawn from 900 local cows. As they pressed the cheese, they sang hymns and gave thanks for the incoming president. In the end, the cheese wheel measured 4 feet in diameter, 13 feet in circumference, 17 inches in height, and weighed 1,235 pounds. It took months for the cheese to be hauled to Jefferson, with the accompanying Leland preaching along the way. After Jefferson received the ripening cheese, he left to attend a weekly church service held in the United States Capitol building. That same day, Jefferson wrote what would become an infamous letter. Like Leland's Republican cheesemongering congregation, the Danbury Baptists felt in the minority in Congregationalist Federalist New England. They feared the loss of religious liberty under the new president. His letter was meant to assure them, explaining that the First Amendment erected, quote, a wall of separation between church and state, unquote, meant to protect the church from the overreach of the very government that Jefferson had been elected to lead. It may be a cheesy story, but that's how a pastor and a president impacted religious liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, continue our conversation today with Dr. Mark Cosgrove. His book is entitled The Brain, the Mind, and the Person Within, an Enduring Mystery of the Soul. And I thought we'd come back to this idea of free will for just a minute, because Dr. Jerry Coyne, who is at the University of Chicago, wrote a while back in USA Today that you really don't have free will. You may feel like you made choices, and your decision about whether to have eggs or pancakes was determined long before you were aware of it, perhaps even before you woke up. There's no freedom of choice, no free will. The problem with that, first of all, is it's based on a set of assumptions, Dr. Mark Cosgrove. But number two, I can find, and you just give us some examples of good evidence from our own personal experience, as well as from experimental psychology, that we do seem to have free will, or as you pointed out just a minute ago, we also have the freedom of free don't, and that is free won't, that we won't do some things. We won't watch pornography. We won't say a curse word. We won't do some things, and that shows will, that shows spirit, that shows conviction, all the things that the Bible talks about.
Yes, and you can accept that unless you are a naturalist who says, the only evidence that I accept is something to do with neurons and brain stimulation, in which case that's a type of poverty of the intellect. I'm only going to look for what I already expect to find. One thing is interesting. Free will is more complicated than just neural recording. If you had a daughter who decided to go to India to be a missionary, was she free or not? She made that decision a dozen years earlier, when she watched mom and dad be missionaries, when she listened to the missionary in her church a couple of years later, when she was dating somebody who was majoring in business as opposed to someone else majoring in international studies. She's gradually moving toward decisions to follow God, to give up the kind of things that she wanted in the past. It's a host of decisions in a human life that eventually leads to accepting that final call, and not something you find that she's a product of a pastor who made a good sermon and then she signed up to go to the mission field right afterwards. We are people who are in the world and part of our brains, and we are involved in lots of decisions every day that can't really be measured electrically. There's no one spike that determines the hand motions either, because hand motions are part of that programmed area, and my decision to go to India is not just a simple hand motion or a simple movement of a leg or an arm. We are complicated beings, and that complexity can't be reduced to simple findings in neural brain work.
Let's, if we can, for just a minute, kind of look ahead. In Chapter 8, you talk about neurotechnologies and robots, and I've alluded to one, the possibility that we will be able to remove certain kinds of negative experiences or memories that would help with things like PTSD and the rest. And we talked about head transplants. People would never have imagined any of that. But you also talk about this idea of robots. Now, again, those people that are transhumanists look forward to the day in which there'll be this singularity where the merging of technology and machines and humans all come together. But we can recognize right now that we can come up with robots that can do some pretty sophisticated things, including driverless cars that we're now talking about. But
Correct.
There is something very different again between a robot or even the most advanced computer and what we're able to do with our brains. Isn't that true?
That's right. And it does bring up what's called the hard problem. You know that you have conscious experience. We sincerely doubt that robots or spiders have conscious or self-conscious experience. That's called the hard problem in neuroscience. Everybody admits it's there. Nobody thinks they can solve it, because how can the brain or the technology of a computer ever give rise to something that's not material? How can matter produce non-matter? It's called the hard problem because we can't even imagine the methods to discover an answer to that. If there is no matter in the universe, there's nothing but matter in the universe, then why do I even search that out? Well, up in your head, you're 3 pounds, you are aware of your conscious experience. It's not an illusion, and even then, you'd have to explain the illusion. That experience is going to be absent in the cyborgs, even if they can do everything like a computer better than you. And we can't make persons have no value. The computers we can throw away, let's not think that of human beings, even damaged human beings. There is going to be a lot of technology that's available, robots. Christianity Today had an article a few issues ago on something titled like, what shall we do? Meaning when your jobs are taken, you need to be thinking of other things to do and other ways to use the skills of human beings. That's the direction to go. And we need Christians in the field to be giving those larger answers. It's more than using and inventing computers. It's learning how to deal with them. And we have movies that are bringing that forward. Are there going to be men in love with their iPhones or a voice on the iPhone? We need to grow up with our understanding of human nature and not let robotics, as helpful as it's going to be, your garage door is a robot. Your sweeper's a robot. We need to think about our futures, think about ourselves as beings, image of God beings. Otherwise, the idea that you're just a tool like a robot will dominate. And we do that anyway. There's certain governments that will just treat human beings like tools to be dispensed with. We certainly can't do that.
That's why, again, you talk so much about this idea of personhood. But just before I let you go, I always like to mention that if students are interested in studying all sorts of different topics, but one of those, of course, which you are teaching in terms of the psychology department and also the foundations of Christian thought at Taylor University, talk about what is available for students or even people that might want to study online through Taylor University.
Well, one thing, and you mentioned the title, Foundations of Christian Thought. I have another book at Kriegel with that title, Foundations of Christian Thought, and that would be giving a study of worldviews and testing worldviews, so looking at naturalism, atheistic existentialism, pantheism, New Age movement, secular humanism, and comparing them to Christian theism, looking at testing them with tests of evidence or philosophical logic or experience. And that's something that can undergird a lot of other subject matter. We think with worldviews. We don't do battle with evidence. We are always trading underlying worldviews, and that's where the battle really occurs. Taylor Online will have many of the courses that are here. Taylor emphasizes faith and learning in every classroom, some more than others. Calculus won't have as much integration between faith and learning, and sociology, child psychology, business ethics. There are a lot of other areas where you could get a good faith basis studying on campus or studying online.
So again, Mark Cosgrove with us, and again, he is the chairman of the psychology department at Taylor University, author of this book, which I do commend to you. It's published by Kriegel, The Brain, the Mind, and the Person Within. Dr. Mark Cosgrove, as always, thank you for the hour that you gave us. Thank you for writing the book, and we look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will get into another topic. As a matter of fact, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking with Mark Hancock. He's with Trail Life USA, and one of the reasons we're doing this is I'm hearing from more and more of you the growing frustration with what is happening in the Boy Scouts. Of course, we can talk about what's already happened in the Girl Scouts, but even what's happening now in the Boy Scouts. So we'll first of all talk about some of the problems, and then, well, is there a solution other than the Boy Scouts? Because I certainly believe in doing all that we can to provide good, positive male role models for our young men, our young boys, so that they can understand what it means to grow up and to be confident and to have manly, masculine skills. So we're going to talk with him. Then we'll finish off looking at some of the issues in the news. A lot to talk about in the second hour. We'll do that right after these important messages.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, you're going to see that this particular conversation pulls together two themes. Number one, that we've talked about on a number of occasions about what it takes to turn boys into men. And we've talked about everything from the men's movement and Promise Keepers and the Boy Scouts and a variety of other things that are out there and have been developed over the years to really help nurture young boys into masculinity and to really understand that. And certainly we can talk about the various youth groups and men's ministries and all of the rest. So that's one of the themes certainly we've talked about so often here on Point of View. The other has been the decline and fall of the Boy Scouts. You know, when Marlon Maddox started this program 45 years ago, the Boy Scouts were kind of in the center of American culture, and they were widely respected and regarded. Even when I began to do this program 32 years ago, it was still that case. But then as time went on, the Boy Scouts didn't move, the culture moved, and they became no longer kind of the center of American life, but they came to be one of the most vilified organizations in the American scene. But then we saw what took place. Over time, many individuals on the board began to change the policies of the Boy Scouts, and as a result, today, I hear from many of you that are really disturbed about what has happened to the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts. By the way, if your kids are in that, fine. But I wanted to talk about an alternative, and that alternative is known as Trail Life USA. And so I wanted to spend some time, first of all, looking at the decline of the Boy Scouts and talking about a very viable alternative. And to do that, we have the Chief Executive Officer of Trail Life USA, Mark Hancock, who actually had a career at a national advertising agency. After becoming a Christian, he's worked, for example, as a youth and college pastor, as an associate pastor, even as a global event director. He has 2 master's degrees in the area of mental health counseling, and of course now is the CEO of Trail Life USA. Joins us now from Greenville, South Carolina. Mark, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. We're happy to be here.
Let's, if we can, for just a minute, before we talk about Trail Life, talk about the Boy Scouts, because there was a time in which the Boy Scouts stayed true to their mission, and as a result, I use that for many decades on this broadcast as an example of the Boy Scouts didn't move, the culture moved. But eventually what seemed to take place where the various people on the board of the Boy Scouts said, you know, we need to make the Boy Scouts more relevant to society. So let's not be so big about whether or not we can have kids that are homosexual on there, maybe even homosexual leaders. Now we can even say we can bring girls into the Boy Scouts. Did you follow that, and did you watch that transition that seems to have taken place?
I did. It's interesting. At the beginning, I was Boy Scout father. My 2 sons in Boy Scouts, and we were in a great troop and really enjoying Boy Scouts. I was not a leader in the troop. I was just a dad, and I saw that transition happen. And I saw our troop, the church that sponsored our troop, say that they probably would not be able to continue to sponsor that troop with the drastic changes that Boy Scouts was making in membership. And so it was out of that really the talk of an organization like Trail Life USA began. In fact, there were 4 factions of several hundred volunteers across the United States that came together in Louisville, Kentucky. in June of 2013 and started talking about what an alternative would look like. And then it was within 6 months that we launched Trail Life USA.
Well, and again, there are probably some families that still have their children in Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. My perspective, and again, you can agree or disagree, I think the Girl Scouts gave up a long time ago. They kind of bought into feminism, and it's hard for me to want to buy Girl Scout cookies. But again, we'll open up the phones in a few minutes to see what people have to say about that. But when the Boy Scouts, first of all, let individuals that had same-sex attraction in there, and when at first they said, well, maybe we'll hold the line, we won't have gay troop leaders, but then they sort of backed off on that. And then now even allowing girls into it or transgenders into it, I think we've lost all possibility of the kind of mentoring that was part of the founding of the Boy Scouts back in, what was it, 1910, right?
Yeah, Kirby, it's an interesting study if you want to look at staying strong. When they gave up their moral compass, and they said at the beginning, we just want to be able to serve more boys. But they gave up that moral compass, and then it was decision after decision. Of course, first, and it wasn't same-sex attraction. Everybody recognizes that boys will at some time in their life, many boys will have experience of same-sex attraction, but that typically goes away in adolescence. What the Boy Scouts said is not that they had a challenge with same-sex attraction and were going to allow that, but that they were going to allow open and avowed homosexuality, which means they were going to force the troop leaders to say to 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old boys, yes, I will encourage you and I will accept the fact that you believe that this behavior is appropriate, rather than what they had done, which is to say, this is a phase that you're going through, and your parents and your church or whoever should work with you through this, but we're not going to recognize it here. And then within a year, they extended that to open and avowed homosexuality in their leaders, and then it went to the transgender decision, and then, of course, more recently, the decision to allow girls. And we think girls are great, but we also think that boys need an environment created specifically for them. And in that one decision that the Boy Scouts made, not only did they acknowledge that after 105 years of producing astronauts and presidents and generals and leaders and the culture, that they didn't really have a secret sauce when it came to boys, that their program would work equally for boys and girls. And in that same decision, they said to girls, you need to come over here and get our highest award that was designed by men for boys. And in that one decision, we really think that they both devalued boys and girls and their specific abilities and giftings.
Sure.
So we think that, and we don't think that they're through yet, which is really discouraging because they have a wonderful legacy, but it's just tragic to see how they've kind of caved when they first began to let loose their moral compass.
Well, and again, the sad reality of that is that up until recently, if you were to look at a resume and it said I was an Eagle Scout, I mean, that tells me everything. That shows me that you have self-discipline, tenacity, you have mastered a number of skills, you have been mentored by individuals. Just look at the number, as you alluded to just a minute ago, Eagle Scouts that have served with distinction in the political realm, in business, in science, and astronauts, and all those kinds of stories. And then now to have devalued that particular honor somewhat, not for those that achieved it in the past, but you sort of have a lot more questions now if you see that on a resume than you did just a few years ago. So when we come back, I want to talk about Trail Life because it also understands the value of core values. That is, that it's Christ-centered, it's church-owned and operated, and how, in some respects, that provides a foundation, even a bulwark against some of the concerns that we've just raised. And a little bit later, if you have comments or questions, of course, we welcome your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to know more about Trail Life USA, of course, we have a link to not only the bio, but the information of Mark Hancock. We'll continue with him and you right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Will divisive debates about public policy break America apart? David French fears that could happen with the current debate and dissension over gun control. He wrote about it after the CNN town hall on gun control, but it could just as easily be written about the controversy and conflict that has surfaced this last week. It might be easy to write off some of the hysterics and hyperbole as an outlier. Surely the American people will regain their senses and realize that even if we have fundamental disagreements about guns and gun legislation, that should never be allowed to pull us apart. That may not be the case. David French says that millions of Americans who watched all or part of the town hall came away with a clear message. These people aren't just angry at what happened in their town to their friends and family members. They hate me. These emotions aren't fake or manufactured. They come from fierce convictions and sincere belief. We have seen similar hysterics over such policy issues as regulatory reform and net neutrality. One of the guests on my radio program explained the progression from conflict over net neutrality to the anger over the gun debate. He reminded us that those who supported the FCC decision about net neutrality were called Hitler. Once you label your opposition as Hitler merely because they want to remove some regulations added 2 years ago, there is nowhere to go but down. Nobody's life is at stake by changing some rules affecting the Internet. However, the gun debate does affect lives, so anyone who opposes you is worse than Hitler. You are evil and support a gun organization that is a terrorist organization. Meanwhile, advocates for gun rights believe that you are trying to take away their ability to defend themselves. Perhaps you can see why such a divisive debate could fracture America. Both sides believe lives are at stake and aren't likely to compromise. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment, I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG, in theaters March 16th. More information at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Mark Hancock with us today, and if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, serves as the Chief Executive Officer for Trail Life USA. And Mark, let's talk about some of the core values, because if there's one thing that I think you learn from the Boy Scout experience is, even though a lot of Boy Scout troops were tied into the church, they weren't necessarily church-owned, Christ-centered. They weren't against it. As a matter of fact, that was a great opportunity to really begin to teach some of those values in the troop. But you started with those assumptions and those core values. Explain a little bit why.
Well, the reason why is exactly the trouble that Boy Scouts found themselves in. Over the years, they had lost their connection with their chartering partner, which in many cases was a church. And they just began to be a place, the church was just a place that the troop met in, and there's not any connection between the troop and the church other than they're providing some real estate for them to meet in, maybe on a Wednesday night or something. And we saw that as one of the errors of Boy Scouts and how they lost their way. Now, you have to remember that at our core, we love the scouting movement and what it's done for boys, and we recognize that there's some real strength in that movement. But we asked ourselves, where did they go wrong? And that was one of the key things. They lost that accountability with that local church. They just became a place to meet. So in Trail Life USA, we envision ourselves as an outreach of the local church. And the institutional head, the pastor, the priest, whoever's in that church, signs off on our chartering document, agreeing with our statement of faith, agreeing with our statement of values about things like purity and stewardship and service and integrity. That chartering organization is intertwined with Trail Life USA. The leaders of that troop, in most cases, the key leaders, are members of that church. And the idea is that we can grow the local church through troops. remarkable thing happens. A boy will invite a neighbor to Sunday school all day long, and the boy won't respond. But he invites him out hiking or camping or bouldering or zip lining. He gets them involved.
Yes.
And we see local churches who are embracing the Trail Life USA vision. We see them growing because that unchurched boy joins the troop, and then the unchurched family joins the church. Just a few months ago, I heard about a boy in South Carolina who showed up at a troop meeting, and he was a little bit unruly for the troop, and they had to make a decision that we're going to embrace him and we're going to love on this boy and we're going to make him a part. And a couple weeks later, the troop master got a call from his mother who said, "Listen, Jimmy is praying at home." And the troop master said, "Okay, why is this a problem?" And the mother said, "Well, we don't pray in our house." And there was this long pause as the troop master thought, "Well, what am I going to do with this?" And then she said, "But we would like to start. Could my husband and I begin attending the troop meetings?"
What a great
within
story.
a few weeks, isn't that wonderful? Within a few weeks, the family joined the church, and they were all baptized in that church. So, and who knows how many times that's being repeated over and over again. But when you commit yourself to being Christ-centered, and that's one of the other issues of the Boy Scouts, that they had to let go of those moorings because they hadn't identified themselves as specifically Christian. Remember, 110 years ago when they formed, everyone was a Christian. And when you said things like God, you knew what you were talking about. But we define who that God is. And we define what Christianity is. And because that's in our founding documents, we're not subject to the same kind of pressures that they folded to.
Let me just mention that we have a link to traillifeusa.com, and under core values, we've talked about Christ-centered, church-owned. Let me take another one that you've already alluded to because it's one that I believe in, outdoor-focused. I have said before that one of the things I love about Christian camps, one of the things I love about things like what used to be the Boy Scouts, but now Trail Life USA and others, is when you can take God's Word and take young people into God's world, and the creation and the revelation both point you to God, there is something very significant that happens there. And so you want to instill adventure, character, and leadership, and that is done outdoors, isn't it?
It really is, and you've done a great job in answering the question because you're exactly right. There's something magically spiritual about the outdoors when you get out there and you can talk about creation. And it's interesting that through things like, in the schools, recess is going or gone, and tug of war is now tug of peace, and Red Rover, dodgeball, and tag are disappearing because we're told they undercut emotional development and create an environment of resentment. So we're punishing boys for the simple circumstance of being boys. And in that, we're kind of removing the reality of outdoor, competitive, boy-friendly play. And then when we drive the boys inside to video games, into a virtual reality, then we criticize them for being in there too. So what we've done with the outdoors is we give them a chance to truly be boys, to enjoy the outdoors together, the kind of rough and tumble of being there. We're restoring that to boyhood again because we think that it's been lost. The wonder of boys is lost in a culture that doesn't value the benefit of risk-taking and adventure and, climbing a mountain or taking on a challenge. And, it reminds me of they had boys and girls on a retreat, and they broke the girls and boys up separate, and they told them to go out, and they gave them a journal, and they gave them a candle, and they gave them a pen and some matches. They said, go out and light your candle and write in the book your journals about your thoughts about who it is that you are. Well, the girls, of course, went and did that obediently, and the boys all got together, threw their journals in a circle in a pile, lit them on fire, and danced around this bonfire, and had a great time. And that's where boys bond in those kind of experiences. They didn't get the whole thing. I'm going to sit down and tell you about my feelings. I don't even know what my feelings are. But in that outdoors, in that male-focused environment, powerful things happen there. And I'll tell you the secret, Kerby, is that what's hidden in Trail Life USA is that powerful things happen in men also. Because we have men who are with their sons on those trips. And we have men who don't have sons but are interested in discipling and mentoring young men. And those guys are connecting in a way that boys go to bed and get in their tents, and the men sit around that fire and they talk about how they can be a better dad, about how they can be a better husband. There's something magical about that gathering of men and boys in the outdoors that allows us to be vulnerable because we've seen each other be tough all day. and now we just get to share our hearts, and it's making a big difference, and a big difference in boys without dads, because they're surrounded by these men who are background checked, child safety, youth protection trained, have signed on to our statement of faith, our statement of values. They're right in line with the way that most people want their boys raised. So single moms are finding great advantages of rolling the boy into Trail Life USA.
If you know my commentaries, I do my commentary every day. My Thursday commentary, which is not out yet, but it will be out in just a couple of days, is entitled Broken Boys. And the reason I wrote it is because there was a piece that was in the New York Times by Michael Ian Black, which says the boys are not all right. And what I say in there is, even though I agree with his diagnosis, I disagree with his prescription. But the diagnosis is right. The American boys are broken. I just think that there are better answers. And one of those you just alluded to, because another one of your core values is male-centered adult leadership. We know how difficult it is, Mark, for a young boy to become a man in a world that is mostly female. Most of their teachers in grade school, lots of their teachers in middle school, a good number of them even in high school are female. If they go even to church, sometimes it's female teachers that are teaching Sunday school. A lot of them don't have a dad at the home. And the best way for a boy to learn how to be a man is to be with other men. And that's why you demand that you have male-centered adult leadership.
We do at a certain level, beyond the elementary level. Then we require that there's men leading those troops, because they need to see men in leadership in order to be men in leadership. You know, you could argue that much of what is right with society is found, if you look close enough, in the attitudes, the respect, mutual admiration between the genders. It's not a competitive thing, but winning men come from winning situations where men of good character pass traits along in an environment that recognizes that kind of rough and tumble. And that's what we're doing. We're setting these boys up to succeed by giving them mentors and models of appropriate male behavior. Listen, it's tragic that we think that we need to sit our boys down and say, hey, don't rape women. Hey, don't shoot people. You shouldn't shoot people. And it's tragic to think that that's where we've come. Like, being a boy is some sort of social disease that has to be eradicated, because if you put a gun in his hand, he's going to shoot somebody. That just isn't true. Trail Life has the answer in that we can say to boys, hey, this is who you should be. Respect women. Be the guy who opens the door. Restoring those things of chivalry. You should be the guy who throws yourself in front of the bullets, not the guy who's firing them. This is who you are. And when you teach boys that stuff, when you teach them about respect and the things that it seems like we've tossed out as a culture, teach them about respecting women, about respecting other people, about respecting the environment, about acknowledging that there are certain principles and truths that we should follow after. You don't have to tell them not to rape women. You don't have to tell them not to go somewhere and shoot people. So we think that the drive and the daring tendencies of healthy boys are what's responsible for what's right with society. When those boys become determined, focused, and winning men, and we think that that's done in an environment where they're surrounded by men who want the best for them.
Well, let's take a break. What are your thoughts? Are boys broken? What are you doing in your own church or community to grow boys into men? We'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school, until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this. You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Mark Hancock. And again, he is the CEO of Trail Life USA. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. My commentary coming out on Thursday, Broken Boys. And this is something we're talking about, the need for providing good, positive male leadership. And this is another avenue to do that. Of course, it has been provided in the past by the Boy Scouts, but we've seen what has happened there. So that's why I wanted you to know about an alternative. And if you'd like to join us, even as we are talking about some of the needs to turn boys into men and to have a positive masculine role model for young boys, love to know what you're doing in your church and in your community. Let's take some phone calls, though. 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to North Carolina first. WLGP. Andrea, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby, for taking my call. I guess I want to say quickly, leadership, I think it's not just male, it's female as well. And, of course, you know all the biggies. You know Dr. Dobson, you know everybody. The leadership is a serious question in our culture today about who leads and who follows. And you and I as Christians have followed this for a lot of years, that the lost leadership role, and of course I absolutely believe the Word of God that males lead by the Word of God. I guess I need to be quiet and hush because I'm a female. But I think Penna gets it. I think we all get it. It's a very dark time to look at leadership in culture and America. We just lost Billy Graham, Anyway, that's all I got to say. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I think it's a good point. And I might just mention that you do have a place for women to serve, even at Trail Life and the various boards and things of that nature, even for some of the younger boys. But I do think that in a world where young boys spend most of their life having to navigate from being boys to men, they have to do it in a woman's world. And it seems to me that Trail Life USA really provides one of the very few opportunities for boys to be around men and to understand what it means to really be under male leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. And we believe in women. Women can serve in our organization all the way up to the highest levels of the board of directors and troop leadership and all kinds of areas. But we make a distinguishing at the troop contact, what we call the troop contact, where the people who are working with the boys, we really think they need to be men from the sixth grade and up. And that's because, like you said, there are so many women leaders providing great examples of leadership in the schools and in the churches, but there's a lack of men showing leadership. And we think that women should lead, in all kinds of opportunities. We're certainly not against women, but boys need a man to follow after. They need a man as an example of how it is that they should grow, how it is that they should serve their families. And so we are specific about that. It certainly isn't to devalue women at all.
I might also mention, too, one of your other core values is servant leadership, because sometimes we have the wrong view, the anti-biblical or non-biblical view of leadership. It's not the idea of bossing people around, but again, a real goal that you have to develop servant leaders, which I think we need also inside and outside the church. Don't you agree?
We absolutely do. And the servant leadership is and we hope that our adults are setting an example. When we get up into the older boys, the middle grade and the high school age, the adults are actually stepping back. By the time boys get in high school, the boys are running the troop. Now, there's an adult in the room advising, but the boys are making the decision. They're standing up before the group and making announcements. They're deciding where they're going to camp. They're deciding what badge they're going to work out, what kind of activities they're going to do. And where else do boys get an opportunity to lead like that? And you mentioned our character, leadership, and adventure as three of our primary objectives in Trail Life. That leadership, in order to be trained in leadership, you've got to practice leadership. So we share that leadership in the role of a servant leader, where the adult in that troop will actually sit back and let the boy lead. And that boy gets an opportunity to stand in front of his troop, to make announcements, to give instruction, to lead the way. The boys They elect leaders. They vote on things that they're going to do, and it gives them opportunity to practice leadership. And you know, Kerby, as well as I do, one of the greatest fears people have is public speaking. So it gives them a chance at an early age to stand in front of a crowd, maybe lead the pledge, lead our oath, open a meeting, give announcements, and to kind of start to chip away at that fear of standing in front of people.
Let's take another phone call. We'll stay in North Carolina for just a minute. Danny, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Mark Hancock.
Thank you, and God bless you for your program today.
Sure.
I'm an Eagle Scout from the Boy Scouts of America in 1977.
Great.
My son is currently working on his Eagle Scout project, and I must say that I'm a little discouraged that some of the comments, the Boy Scouts, Eagle Scout rank still takes the same determination, still takes the same hard work and leadership that it did 20, 30, 40, 100 years ago.
That's true, yeah.
Okay. Because of the fact that the Boy Scouts of America have chosen to go in a certain direction versus that of trail life, I don't think it changes the program as much as it does the leadership and the direction that it may be heading. But the program currently is the same.
Well, and again, I wouldn't disagree. I was the one that was talking about the fact that it used to be when I would look at a resume, see Eagle Scout, I still recognize that there's a lot of work involved. But again, you start wondering where the Boy Scouts are ending up in terms of what's in the troop. And so many of those were tied into the church and those kinds of things. But again, I appreciate your comments. And again, when I see somebody who's been an Eagle Scout, whether it's you or whether it's your son achieving that, that's a high honor, and it tells me a lot about perseverance and various skills that were developed and camaraderie and leadership and all the rest. So I appreciate you sharing some of that with us today here on Point of View.
Yeah, Kerby, let me respond to that too.
Go ahead.
If I may. Yeah, thanks for that comment. I think you're right on to something. There still are a lot of powerful elements in that Eagle Scout. My oldest son is an Eagle Scout, and we respect the legacy. We honor the legacy of Boy Scouts, and what we say is we're honoring the legacy and we're raising a standard. I think what we think in terms of is that there used to be a moral thing that was tied to it too, that I think in the future may begin to spin away. But certainly for what it is that your son has done, congratulations. That's an amazing accomplishment. Like I said, my son did too. We recognize the Eagle Scout Award in Trail Life USA, and when adults or boys transfer from Boy Scouts into Trail Life USA, they actually are, I guess you can say, they matriculate, and we're able to give them credit for a lot of those things that they
that's
earned
good.
in Boy Scouts, because we recognize that a lot of the skills are the same. And when we have Eagle Scouts that transfer into Trail Life USA, it takes them about a year and a half, but they can turn that Eagle Award, or they can add to the Eagle Award what's called the Freedom Award, which is our highest award. And it's a little more difficult to achieve because it also adds faith elements and some other elements that have to be pursued, on top of the skills elements and some of the other character building things that are in the Eagle Scout. But greatest respect in the world for the Eagle Scout. Even adult Eagle Scouts that transfer into Trail Life and become leaders in Trail Life are eligible to go on and achieve the Freedom Award. And of course, their accomplishments are things like providing leadership and sharing the faith testimony and more along the faith and all the elements that you see in Eagle, plus a lot of the faith elements. So great job for your son. Congratulations. You should be proud.
I did want to also get into some of the specifics. Since we're coming to a break, we'll come back and cover those afterwards. You've already sort of answered one, and that is if somebody or a child or a young boy has been part of Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, or whatever, can they transfer? I think you've answered that. But there's a whole section on your website about how to start and to even find a troop. So when we come back from the break, what I thought I would do is, since I know that there are pastors and church leaders that are saying, okay, I didn't even know this existed. This would be something we might want to do at our church. First of all, let me find out if there's one in our area. If not, what would it take to start one? So we'll get into some of those basics. And if, again, you go to the website, you're going to find a lot of great information. First of all, a section on who we are. It takes you into the core values. It gives you a little bit of an understanding of various staff, the partners, the issue of fundraising and the rest. Then how to start a troop, how to find a troop, how to get connected if you would want to volunteer. There's a store, there's a newsletter, there's a lot of resources. So we're going to come back and kind of work our way through that if you would like to know more about that for your community. And so, again, you can find that at traillifeusa.com, or you don't have to remember all that because we have a link on the website, and you can go to pointofview.net and find all of that as well. It has a statement of faith, a statement of values, the vision, the mission, the motto, the oath, and much, much more. So it's very complete. But we'll come back and try to answer some of those real specific questions if you'd like to have a Trail Life USA chapter in your church. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Pastor John Leland, a Baptist minister in Massachusetts, celebrated Thomas Jefferson's election from his pulpit by announcing that the congregation would make a giant wheel of cheese to honor the incoming president. So, on the morning of July 21, 1801, the congregation hauled pails and pails of curds drawn from 900 local cows. As they pressed the cheese, they sang hymns and gave thanks for the incoming president. In the end, the cheese wheel measured 4 feet in diameter, 13 feet in circumference, 17 inches in height, and weighed 1,235 pounds. It took months for the cheese to be hauled to Jefferson, with the accompanying Leland preaching along the way. After Jefferson received the ripening cheese, he left to attend a weekly church service held in the United States Capitol building. That same day, Jefferson wrote what would become an infamous letter. Like Leland's Republican cheesemongering congregation, the Danbury Baptists felt in the minority in Congregationalist Federalist New England. They feared the loss of religious liberty under the new president. His letter was meant to assure them, explaining that the First Amendment erected, quote, a wall of separation between church and state, unquote, meant to protect the church from the overreach of the very government that Jefferson had been elected to lead. It may be a cheesy story, but that's how a pastor and a president impacted religious liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Mark Hancock with us for just a few more minutes, and again, he is the CEO of Trail Life USA. And Mark, let's get into some of the specifics, because there are people that are listening to this saying, I didn't even know there was a Trail Life USA, and so I would like some more information. Or maybe some people said, well, I've heard of it, but I never really thought about I could have it at our own church. So one of the buttons that you can click on your website, traillifeusa.com, is how to start a troop. Take us through what that might require, or if people have more questions. I mean, I could sit here and take more phone calls, but we only have a few minutes to really cover this, and they would like to talk to you off air. That's possible too. But take us through the steps that would be necessary to begin to form a troop. There's hundreds of troops being formed around the country, but again, you have room for a few more, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. We're only 4 years old, but we have about 740 active troops, almost 28,000 members in those 4 years. We're in 48 states, but we recognize there's not a troop close to everybody. So you have the opportunity to start a troop. If you go to our website and click on the Start a Troop tab, it will walk you through the process. It takes 4 to 5 adults in a church, in connection with the church, in order to start the troop. The way we start troops is we get the adults in place first, and then the boys come in. It's a little bit different than Boy Scouts. We think it's critical that we have the right foundation in place and the right church in place. And that church does go through a vetting process to make sure that we're in line on both our spiritual values and our statement of values. So an adult typically drives that charge. And about 25% of the time, it's a church leader or a church staff member that starts a troop. But the other 75% of the time, it's a man in a church who feels called to do something for boys. He recognizes that boys are in crisis, that there is this war on boys that began back in the 90s and started to devalue masculinity. And he recognizes that boys need help. And so that guy typically drives the charge, and he'll go to the pastor and say, hey, listen, I want to start this in our church. And it takes that because, pastors have a tough time getting men involved. And so if you find a man who's got this passion, he goes to the pastor and says, I'm going to start this organization. He gets permission, and then he lines up the other adults around it. And we found that at the beginning of the process, we asked, how many boys do you expect to have in your troop? And we found out that it's actually double that once the troop gets up and running. They may say, we're going to start with 10 boys. We're going to start with 20 boys. And then when they start within a couple months, they usually double that number. So you'd be surprised at how many boys come out of the woodwork and how many families start to show up. And so when those boys start to show up with their dads or other men in the church join it, then you start to build out your leadership team. And those are the contact people who are running the nightly troop, the weekly troop meetings. And then there's also the women who are involved in the ministry. That's when they start to get involved. It takes anywhere from 30 to 120 days to start a troop, and that just has to do with how quickly you can gather your team together. All the adults are criminal background checked every few years, and then they also complete child safety youth protection training every 2 years, which is about a 2-hour online training. We want to keep boys safe. So that's kind of what's involved. It's, the first year, I think it's a $325 fee for the troop to start, and it's typically paid by the church. And then in subsequent years, that fee goes down to $195, along with insurance, which covers every boy and every adult. Takes all that question off of the local church. They don't have to cover any of that. The boys and the adults are insured for activities with the troop. We also, provide them with a charter and all the program materials to get up and running and all the training. This year, we're going to, I think, 6 or 7 different cities across the United States doing leadership training. So we try to get out and bring the training to the adults. And then there's a bunch of online training. There's a great Facebook forum that the leaders can go to and ask all kinds of questions and get some great advice on getting the troop up and going.
I was clicking on that and finding out that it's not just churches that sometimes are sponsors, but homeschool groups and a variety of others. So, think outside the box, because there may be some other ways that you can gather together this as well.
Yeah. Probably 99% are churches, and that's really our vision, to help grow the local church. But there's also church-like or parachurch ministries that are boy-focused and Christ-centered. We have a Christian gun group in Texas that's chartered a troop, but they're very connected to a local church, and then they have their own statement of faith and their own 501c3 corporation, so they qualify.
And again, you also have a store, because people are going to the parents are going to say, okay, we're talking about troop uniforms, we're talking about some other things. Of course, you have the Bibles and flashlights and posters and lanyards and all sorts of things. So again, people can go to that website and really see very quickly all sorts of other resources that would be available. And it's a way to get something started in your own community. And again, it's church-based, it's Christ-centered. It is something that we've, I think, needed for a long time. And as you pointed out when we were talking with Danny just a minute ago, if somebody is already an Eagle Scout, they can transfer over, or they're in the process, though, of doing that, and would say, I probably would like to be with something that's much more faith-based. you actually accept them as well. So these are some great opportunities for young boys. So just before we go, talk about any other things that we need to know about in terms of getting this started, because I suspect as we get off the air, some people are going to go to the website and see what they can do to begin to start at least one more troop in their local community.
Well, what's amazing to me is the stuff that's hidden in the program that we didn't put there. And that's what convinces us that God's, plus our dynamic group, really convinces us that God is in this thing. Because we're seeing men connect with other men. We're seeing boys without dads finding Christian mentors. I was at a meeting not long ago in Virginia, and we're at a bonfire following the meeting, and a woman came up to me and she says, "I need to tell you that I'm so thankful for this organization." I said, tell me why. She says, "Well, 10 years ago, my husband died and left me with a 2-year-old son. Wow. So I've cried out to God. That there would be men in place for my son at the time that he needed them." And now he's 12 years old, and he's in the Navigator program at Trail Life USA, and he's surrounded by Christian men who are mentoring him. She said, "My husband would want me to thank you." And that's just some of the secrets. Men connecting with other men. We had a man who served 4 tours in Afghanistan and came back, like so many of our veterans, who couldn't quite engage with the culture, couldn't find his place. The things that he had seen and experienced over there just made it difficult for him to value the same things. And a troop caught sight of him and his church, and they asked him to help out with some of the outdoor skills, which he abounded in. And he found a brotherhood there. And he told me, he stopped me, and he said, I got to thank you. He says, "I have found my brothers. I thought that I had lost that concept of a band of brothers." He doesn't even have a son in the program, Kerby, but he is so ministered to because he's working with these other men on a singular purpose and raising up godly men. And the brotherhood that he has found there has brought him great joy. So there's some great secrets hidden in Trail Life USA. We're not just ministering to boys. The whole family is getting blessed.
Well, again, there's a place for you to volunteer, a place for you to start a troop or to find one. And so take the time to go to that website. We have all those links on our website. Again, Trail Life USA. Mark Hancock has been with us, CEO of Trail Life USA. And Mark, thank you so very much for sharing that with us this hour.
Thank you, Kerby. God bless you.
That's all we have for today. And if you find yourself saying, "I'd like to know a little bit more about some of the things that you have covered," in the first hour, we had Mark Cosgrove with us, and we talked about his book, The Brain, the Mind, and the Person Within. And then the second hour, we had Mark Hancock with us. And so we've spent some time talking about this as a great opportunity for turning young boys into men. So those are some resources that are available on our website, pointofview.net. All through the week, we're going to be covering lots of important issues. We'll get back to some of the news items tomorrow, but every once in a while I like to take a break to focus on some of these really important issues apart from some of the news stories. So that's what we've done. I want to thank Doug for his help behind the scenes, Steve as well. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.